Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to the Target Smart Podcast. I'm your host, Albert Morales. Remember to subscribe to us on YouTube and catch us on any one of the platforms where you can catch your podcast, whether it's Spotify, Apple, you name it, we're there. Give us a like. This week, I am very pleased to announce that we have an old friend of mine, an old former colleague, Greg Speed. He is the president of America Votes. Greg and I go back many moons ago to our days working with Congressman Martin Frost, Matt Engel, and that gang back home in Texas. So Greg is the president of America Votes. He's worked to create a coalition of partners over the last couple of decades, I guess. Over, I think, 400 national and state partners to be exact in coordination to build out these efforts throughout states. I think today America Votes has at least operations in around 20 states that are critical to Democrats' success in November. So they serve as a coordination hub of the progressive community. But I'm going to stop with the introduction of America Votes and get right into bringing in our guest, Greg Speed. Greg, welcome to the Target Smart Podcast. Let's start with some basics here. Why don't you share with our audience how you came about in the business of politics in the progressive space, and a little bit of your background for those who don't know you.
Sure.
I think those are few and far between, but go ahead.
Well, thank you, Albert. Wonderful to be with you always, but especially here on your show. How I got into this? Well, as you said, we go way back. I've been in Washington for some time now, on the Hill and in the party committees, and now at America Votes for quite some time. And got into the work even before that, getting the political bug at a very young age, just knowing, from the time I was, in middle school, that this was my passion, that this is what I wanted to do. And this being campaigns and politics and electing the right people to change the country. And, when that was my passion and I learned along the way that you could make a living doing it, I knew I'd found the right thing. So a whole range of experiences, and I'm happy to drill into any piece of that background that might be instructive, or we can talk about our old times together on redistricting.
Well, yeah. I mean, my first memory of you is I'm working in the Martin Frost campaign headquarters in Arlington, Texas, with Randy Dukes. You remember Randy, our late friend. He taught me a lot of lessons that served me well. But I remember you coming in, and the campaign was a buzz. Oh, we got the Washington guys coming in. This was mid to late '90s, and but yeah. But what was your first your very first paid job? I guess in politics is what I like to start asking our guests, and so to tell us more about that.
So yeah, my first paid gig in politics. Well, first there was a lot of volunteering that went in the first place. As I mentioned, I kind of threw myself at this from a young age. From the time I went to my alma mater, the great state University of Wisconsin, I just was all in on any campaign that happened. It happened and somewhat serendipitously that my freshman year and beginning of my sophomore year were the 1991, 1992. For those of us in Gen X of a certain age, we know how iconic 1992 was in terms of, an election that was the first we could vote in. And also, the first that really felt like there was a real change of the guard in terms of generational politics, obviously electing a Democrat after 12 years of Reagan and Bush. And so in answer to your question, I threw myself into every volunteer opportunity I could do. And then it wasn't enough. I wanted to keep going. And in 1994, which was quite a different cycle, as you know, wanted to keep volunteering, and there were so few kids interested in continuing to do the work that they insisted on paying you. So I went to work for a guy named Chuck Koala, who was running for governor of Wisconsin in 1994. He was the Senate Democratic leader. Let's gloss over the fact he spent some time in jail a decade or so later for some stuff unrelated to the campaign that I was paid on. But my first paid gig was a job for Chuck Koala, making phone calls to supporters, trying to raise money by phone, trying to ID voters, you name it. They built an in-house phone bank and they paid for it because they couldn't find any students or anyone to volunteer for it. So I found myself doing work that the previous year I'd been doing for free. They were willing to pay me, not much, but more than the minimum wage. And that was my first paid gig. After that, and that was still sort of, in college, etc. I went, my first really post-college professional job was a whole host of congressional campaigns, House districts in Kentucky and in Florida, a path that eventually led to me going to the DCCC in the communications department there, after doing my first really paid professional campaign gig was, to be very specific, in Louisville, Kentucky, working for the re-election of a congressman named Mike Ward in the Louisville, Kentucky 3 district. That was my first full-time paid gig in politics.
And at that point, you realized that, hey, I could make a living doing this, and you set out.
Yeah, I think underneath your question is kind of like, when did the light bulb click here? And for me, it was actually, I had a real fork in the road moment leading into that job, where I'd moved from Madison to Washington, intent to find a job in politics, quote unquote, right? I actually got a job on the Hill as a staff assistant. The chief of staff, a wonderful woman, chief of staff to this congressman named Linda Hennessy, who's passed many years ago. But she said to me, look, you got this staff assistant job. It's yours if you want it. And I'm like, great. Now I can be here with my friends in DC, working on the Hill, et cetera. But she's like, you told me what you want to do. And what you seem interested in is campaigns, not answering the phone on the Hill from our crazy constituents and, irate people, et cetera. So you have a choice. You can move to Louisville, Kentucky, and open our re-election office, and know no one, and work with our candidate's crazy mother every day and her volunteers. Or I can give you this job in DC. You can stay right here, etc. She's like, it's your choice, but I'll tell you what, you'll be a hell of a lot happier moving out to Louisville all by yourself, where no one, but it's going to be a job that's much closer to what you're interested in. And I will always be grateful that, one, she offered me 2 jobs and pushed me to take the one that really linked up more with where my interests were.
Well, let's fast forward now a little bit and switching gears, Greg. Let's talk America Votes. So, progressive organizations come and go. There's a cemetery chock full of progressive think tanks and get out the vote operations that have flourished over the years, and they're no longer around. What have you done differently to withstand the test of Father Time? I mean, you guys have been around forever now. You all are considered the umbrella. If there was an AFL-CIO of progressive organizations, I think it'd be America Votes. What's been your strategy? How have you gotten this far?
Well, I appreciate it. How have we avoided that cemetery you referenced? Happy to answer that and appreciate your framing, Albert. The short answer, I think, would be, and I've been with America Votes, not just to correct the record. A lot of folks think I've been from the beginning or founded it. I did not. This predates me. Cecile Richards was our founder, actually. Many folks know from her wonderful tenure at Planned Parenthood. We have stood the test of time as an organization at America Votes for now, operating continuously in this role since 2003. It's very straightforward. We have a mission that is absolutely essential, and we have maintained fealty to that mission year in, year out, election after election, and it is our North Star. So let me unpack that for just a moment. The mission is ongoing coordination across a set of all allied groups. The only thing we ask of them is to come to the table around the things they agree on. That is democracy and the need to defend it and to continue to have a democracy in this country and expansive voting rights to continue to bring more people into that democracy, and that we coordinate the work to build power and win the elections that the coalition partners of our groups agree to. It is, as I think you mentioned in the lead-in, a progressive coalition of everything from labor unions to organizations like Planned Parenthood or Emily's List. Sorry, my light here in the office went out. I'll try to get it back. To state-based organizations doing community organizing, to you name it, state and national, multi-issue, multiracial, but that what we agree on is that we are better and stronger together, and that we will come to the table to coordinate, to be transparent, to share data, to build a shared plan, to win, to leverage our advantages as individual groups and as a coalition collectively. And America Votes is the glue that has brought that group together with both technical supports, staffing supports, financial resources, you name it. But we center the partners always, and we center the mission always. And AV is not the story. It is the groups we're bringing together and the work they are doing that is central to our story. So kind of leading from behind, understanding who we are, what we do, and the endurance of that mission. You can't have two versions of us or it doesn't work. You've got one too many. You can't recreate this every 2 or 4 years, bring in, just to name names here. You can't have a Obama blessed version of this or a Clinton blessed but this has to be an ongoing thing that lives beyond a single campaign, a single politician, a single administration, that is certainly built to support and work and be, what we need to be in the moment, but that, was here before and will be here after. And we never lose sight that we have to keep our North Star, our mission, and the coalition partner groups that we bring together.
Well, I think you left one thing out. I think you got to have strong leadership skills.
Thank you.
That's
my team would appreciate you raising that too.
You either have it or you don't.
Yeah.
Right.
Can we take a beat and let me just get this light back on? It's really annoying me.
Sure.
It's a motion. Yep, there it is. Okay.
There it is.
Yeah, I'll get it. Bad. I'll need to gesticulate to be able to keep it from going off again.
Hey, so speaking of leadership, Greg, as an executive, I'm sure there's a constant push of trying new things, right? What's that next gadget on the campaign? How much do you focus on experimenting with new tactics and technology, and how do you arrive at that decision of whether or not it's worth it? A lot of it, I think, is timing, right? You don't try something out in the summer of a big election.
That's right. Yeah. So, to go back to the question around leadership first, because I'd be remiss and I'd feel bad if I did not lift up the incredible team that we've had together at America Votes. To answer your previous question, it's fealty to mission. It is putting partners first. It's keeping an amazing set of leaders in the states and nationally. I mean, I've been with America Votes for almost 17 years, and I am not the longest tenured person doing programmatic work here. There's a couple ahead of me and many, many right behind me. So we keep the people doing this work year in, year out. And that's a huge piece of the success. And to bring in new folks like our executive director, Darian Dawson, and many others. But to go to your question, actually, why don't you rephrase it quickly, Albert? I know it was around the new and how we process it.
Yeah,
But
yeah. I
yeah,
mean, I'm sure you're constantly getting approached about new technologies that are coming out, especially, next week I'm talking about the digital business
yeah.
that frankly wasn't around when we were working for Martin. I mean, I remember faxing
You
our
want to go down
canvas
that path?
results.
Yeah, doing the clips was really clips. Yeah,
Yeah, doing all that
yeah,
stuff. But nowadays, it seems like there's a new product every
yeah.
month or so. How do you determine whether or not it's worth your time, and what are the metrics that you
Yeah,
more or less look for?
yeah, it's a great question. I mean, first of all, when it comes to the new in terms of especially sort of programmatic tools or things that are like um, part of the workflow that need to be absorbed into that in order to be useful, we try to maintain a real clear time horizon as best we can for a certain point in the two-year cycle whereby nothing new can really be adopted and utilized effectively in terms of training, deployment, you name it. And that is, we're well past that point sitting here at July 18th, 2024 with regard to some pieces of this. If it's tools or tech or things that really are meant to improve existing workflows, they got to get in the workflows very, very early. Now we'll look for opportunities to pilot new things, to kind of go over here to the side and, road test this in a state or something else, but that isn't going to be part of the, overall flow of multi-state program that's been, that needs to be clear and consistent across states. Then I would say the time horizon is very similar in terms of how we think about new programmatic tactics. This particular application of texting, or this is a new script that's testing really well. Like we want to see good data behind the efficacy, but also is this something that can really be built in to our overall program and strategy? And are we confident enough in any improvements? One, to be able to do it on a time horizon. Two, to be confident that it should come potentially at the opportunity cost of a tactic or something that we've done that maybe on paper isn't quite as efficacious by this one test, but that we know has stood the test of time. We know how to deploy it well, and we know how to scale it.
Makes perfect sense to me. So, Greg, between Dobbs' decision and something you and I have worked together on over the years, redistricting, do you think the average Democratic activist or voter understands the importance of regaining state legislatures and governorships? I mean, so much hinges on it, whether it's redistricting or now that abortion is being left to the states. This town is so centered around it's so centric around Congress and Senate. But do you think the average Democrat realize how much more important it is to
Mm-hmm.
you know have control of these chambers? I mean, you work with them more than
Yeah,
most.
well, I mean, it's an interesting question, Albert. I think the answer is yes, and in ways that I might not have answered the question the same way before. You mentioned Dobbs along the way,
Yeah,
and I think Dobbs is actually a fascinating example of voters really understanding the elections and what's on the ballot in a pretty deeply sophisticated way. So I would say two things coming out of Dobbs and really just the MAGA experience of the last decade. I do believe, just generally speaking, the stakes, what is at stake in our democracy, is more present for voters. And that voters post Dobbs demonstrated a remarkable sophistication in that. Let me be clear about what I mean. 2022 midterm was really two midterm elections. where Dobbs and abortion rights was absolutely present, either on the ballot or, zombie abortion laws had now taken effect. You saw a dramatically different election than you did in the nation as a whole in 2022. For example, in the key battleground states of Wisconsin, of Michigan, of Arizona, etc., you had contexts where voters knew that abortion could soon be illegal based on existing laws or based on who was in power. You had very, very high turnout relative to the country as a whole in battleground states. You had overwhelming victories in states like Michigan, where abortion was literally on the ballot, and you had a clear choice in candidates such as Gretchen Whitmer and that woman Tudor Dixon, who was clearly anti-choice. And you had dramatically high turnout and a blue wave in much of that so-called battleground map. Whereas nationally, in especially bluer states, where abortion rights, many voters do not feel that their rights are as threatened because of the presence of Democratic legislatures or governors. Now, we all know why they shouldn't be complacent in terms of what could happen after 2024 with a national ban or with the Comstock Act, et cetera. But turnout was much, much lower in states where abortion wasn't a salient, or where Trump and MAGA wasn't trying to steal the election after 2020. And so in New York, you saw turnout. In California, turnout dropped through the floor. We lost the House, we know, because of that complacency among Democrats and, sadly, to some extent among our voters, because we did not get organized enough in those places and make clear that, oh, no, just because you got a true blue, trifecta in Sacramento or in Albany, no, everything's still on the line. We did not do an effective job of that. And you saw turnout look extremely different from what you saw in Wisconsin and in Arizona and in Nevada and in Michigan, Pennsylvania.
Yeah,
Georgia.
it's
Well, let's go.
Yeah, it does. I mean, what frustrates me a lot is, I can still, thinking back to 2018, it's like we've been on this winning streak, but it's like no reporter or media figure ever talks about that. You name the special election, we won it. I mean, we had some losses that we probably shouldn't have taken in, I guess, 20. But I think that was poor candidate recruitment more than anything. And again, to your point, maybe some of us were asleep at the switch. But anyway, I digress. So staying on the America Votes track, Greg, it's been a cornerstone, obviously, in the progressive strategy for years now. You can almost say decades. Could you share with the audience some specific initiatives or campaigns that have been pivotal in building it up to this level that maybe don't get the attention, of course, because it may not sound sexy, but it has a meaningful impact on the lives of people?
Yeah, I guess I'd go back to, part of our role is bringing groups together and coming up with a shared strategy and really thinking about what are the leveraged opportunities to make an impact out there. And one of the things we're particularly proud of is, you just talked about how it feels like we're not getting the attention. And I felt this way for years, and I have a lot of funders and strategists in our community come and say, well, why don't we have a Supreme Court strategy? Or why aren't we focused on redistricting? And we feel as if we have, without feeling the need to create a new project or, rush to the New York Times with our hot idea, we pulled, together a lot of key stakeholders, most especially organized labor, in-state funders, donors in the states, focused on their own states, to really lean in and focus on some Supreme Courts in particular. It's been over a decade or almost a decade since we won the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. And I took to national funders and some of our national partners a PowerPoint that laid out how we could win in that year due to a weird set of circumstances and resignations and scandals, the court majority in 2015 in Pennsylvania, and easily hold it for the rest of the decade, and then impact redistricting in a profound way. And guess what? In 2015, we won the state Supreme Court. We held it for the rest of the decade, and that court delivered a fair map, undid a egregious Republican gerrymander, and we have one chamber of power and perhaps soon two in Pennsylvania. We have several more members of Congress than we otherwise would have, and America Votes played a key role of that, not alone with many, many stakeholders, but we've done that time and again. We had that majority in North Carolina. Sadly, we lost it, and it's going to take a while to get back. But a lot of our partners and groups and donors on the ground there won it in a really tough context. We all know what happened in Wisconsin last April, which I was personally very involved in, along with a number of folks like John Stocks and Ben Wickler, and an amazing group of folks in Wisconsin. Incredibly proud of what we did there. So, we have been really, this community, I don't just mean America Votes, but our community has actually been pretty damn smart about looking at the levers of power and how we affect what needs to happen many, at least an election away from where it may have an impact. I give the court example as a specific one. We've also helped, hardly us alone, but AV was among some entities that helped, build a real conversation and some infrastructure around fair maps and redistricting in terms of a national committee for that.
So again, from where you sit, Greg, with your vast network that you have, you get a bird's eye view of everything that's happening in the states with regard to Democratic versus Republican infrastructure. Are you seeing any? First of all, I think it's a two-part question.
Yeah.
Do you think we're slightly ahead of the game? I know Trump's been putting all his money into, or a lot of his money has been going to his legal funding or his legal fund war chest, and as a result, you hear some Republicans complaining that there aren't enough boots on the ground. But is there anything that you see them doing that's new this cycle that we better get on top of before too long?
Yeah. First of all, I think it's not like us to boast, but I do believe our side, our community, is ahead of the game relative to the Republicans, the right, and MAGA. I do. And we can talk about, why that is, but I think we are. When it comes to data, y'all are a part of, and others. When it comes to coordination, we're very proud of. When it comes to the capacity to engage voters on the ground, I think we're, in every piece of that, ahead of where the right is. What I see that's new and somewhat concerning is some people on their side have kind of figured out a little bit of what we've been doing for quite some time. When I hear people like Charlie Kirk extolling the virtues of what our groups have done and naming America Votes in that, I'm not thrilled. One, I hate hearing him say our name. Two, it means they're beginning to figure out that they need to get their acts together. And so we've seen that not necessarily manifest in a whole lot of work yet, but you've seen initiatives where they're trying to get out of their own way on things like early voting or vote by mail recruitment, and talking about a fairly sophisticated program, including a psychological deprogramming of some of their voters to undo some of the, if it's possible between now and November, to do that through talk therapy. I doubt it, but we'll see. But they're beginning to get it on a sort of broad infrastructure level, and then that infrastructure is beginning to build the nodes of some program like early voting and vote by mail and things that are very high leverage, that are best done very tightly coordinated across a whole community. And, just the fact they're not, pushing all their vote to a single day in November, has always been crazy from their standpoint and concerns me some.
Interesting. So you're a proud son of the Midwest.
I am.
What will you be looking for in Michigan and Wisconsin specifically over the next 3 4 months
Yeah.
that
Um,
you'd like to highlight? Yeah.
yeah, that's happy to. Always happy to talk about the Midwest and Wisconsin in particular. Um, I will. First of all, I think the blue wall is imperative. I think we all know that, but the blue wall states of Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, coupled with um, Nebraska 2, brings you to 270 even, and is probably the clearest path to winning the election. Absolutely vital that we continue to play across the battlegrounds. I'm talking about specifically Arizona and Nevada, and after that, Georgia and North Carolina. And it's absolutely critical that we look at states that are blue but could go purple, or God forbid, a tinge of red. Your Virginias, Minnesotas, et cetera, New Mexico. But the Midwest is going to be front and center. And let me speak to what I'm looking for in those states. I believe that they are critical, that Wisconsin will be the closest of the three. Despite what this poll or that may have said this year, it is simply on paper and in reality on the ground the most competitive of the three, followed by Pennsylvania and then by Michigan. All of them are absolute, top tier battlegrounds. And right now, I would put in the toss up category. I am confident of our ability to win all three of the states. There have been very subtle trends in each of those, separate and apart from any election 2024 dynamics with Biden, Trump, or Vance or Harris. Subtle things in each state that have been accruing to our favor. I mean, demographically and regionally, the trends are not dramatic in those states, but they are ever so slightly in our favor. And I can drill into that if it's of interest, or talk offline if it's not. But I'll tell you one thing I don't believe, which is that JD Vance brings any special sauce to that. The fact that he is from Ohio, Southwest Ohio, by the way, which might as well be Kentucky, means absolutely nothing in Wisconsin and in Michigan, most of Michigan, and in most of Pennsylvania. He will have some strengths in, generically, and some weaknesses. There is nothing particularly unique about those that concern me one bit about his impact in, let's call them, the Big Ten states, if someone wants to fold Ohio into that. But to say that somehow because someone's from Southwest Ohio, and this is the Midwestern me speaking, to say that somehow that's going to impact Wisconsin shows a fundamental lack of understanding of the Midwest and why Wisconsin is a competitive state when demographically it should be redder than Indiana. And the reason Wisconsin is a purple state is because of cultural things that have, existed for decades in the state, that go beyond, simple white, black, it's, rural, urban, but that are just, intrinsic to Wisconsin. It's a, very low evangelical. You could say the same with many parts of Michigan. That, it's non-evangelical, to kind of go into demographic parlance. Among the lowest rates of religiosity, to use another, high-class term, in the entire country. You have not the Scotch-Irish people that J.D. Vance, but you have Polish folks and German and Lutherans that come from an entirely different political tradition. And that's why the upper Midwest and states like Minnesota are bluer than they would otherwise look if you just simply looked at it, through basic lens of, race and urbanity, et cetera. And so I say that because I know that's a lot in the weeds of Midwest, but I've been very resentful this week of some commentators somehow saying because J.D. Vance from southwestern Ohio, which is culturally as far as you can get from some parts of Wisconsin or Michigan, is somehow going to put those states in play, just shows you actually don't really understand the Midwest.
Yeah, I have my own thoughts about. I think that beard is a disguise
Yeah.
to
Yeah, the
disguise
beard's
from
a disguise,
everything
and
that he said
it apparently has zero
negatively.
charisma after last night. So add that to the list.
Yeah,
But I ain't worried about,
flat.
the hillbilly elegy somehow
Yeah, so
flipping the blue wall.
yeah, we'll have some hillbilly eulogies if you
Amen.
were to get elected. But so are you? I don't buy into these Republican claims about their support levels growing amongst voters of color in Milwaukee and Detroit. I'm sure you follow that closer
I
than
do.
most. What are your thoughts there? I just don't see it. I mean, I see. Don't get me wrong. I see that support level amongst my Latino brethren in pockets of Texas. That's real. But
Yep.
we can leave that conversation for a different day. But talk to us about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of it goes to what I was just saying though too, Albert, about like the difference between rural Ohio and Wisconsin. It's as much about place as it is race, right?
Yeah,
Um, and that's why the Latino vote in on the Valley in Texas and in the Metroplex of North Texas, you're talking about maybe racially or to some extent even culturally maybe so, but like the effects of the communities they live in need to be accounted for too. And so to go to your to go specifically to your question about Milwaukee, Detroit, but then the Republican claims more generally, let me start from the bottom or the back. I think we should take the claims seriously but not literally. um, I think there is some evidence of erosion among um, uh, voters of color on the whole. Very modest in on the whole, and non-existent if you look at a certain state or district or county in many cases. But if you look at these demographics as a whole, particularly less engaged voters within the Black or Hispanic community, more marginal. Like there's some reason for concern and reason to maybe expect a modest attrition. But if you apply that to a specific battleground community in an urban or suburban place that we have to win, by and large, it's quite modest. And I think we can't afford any losses among Black and brown voters, or we could lose the whole thing. So we got to fight for every single one of them. But this is something that I think we have to take very seriously, if less over time, if less literally than the bombast of the Trump campaign. And I do want to, and I know I've gone on that for a bit, but I want to go specifically to Detroit and Milwaukee. I think there is evidence that much of a lot of the focus has been on, our margins are going down in these places, or but what is happening to an extent in those, and I would add Philadelphia to this as well, we're not necessarily losing support in these places. It is that our voters and our supporters in the Black community of Detroit are moving to Oakland County, or they're moving from West Milwaukee into Waukesha. We tend to think of the trend in these suburban areas that have been good for Democrats as, white voters coming over, suburban moms, etc. That's true to an extent, but much of it is our voters moving into these communities from cities into Waukesha, into Oakland County, Michigan, into Montgomery County and Delaware County, Pennsylvania, out of Philly. That is when you look at, okay, what is margin loss on the whole? I think a significant amount of it isn't those, the Black vote necessarily shifting, is being more distributed within the state.
yeah. Well, so shifting gears a little bit here, Greg, can you share with our audience something that the punditry class isn't necessarily addressing that's going to have a major impact in November? Take your
Yeah,
pick.
I think this is another answer kind of in the weeds, but you asked me on, so you knew what you were going to get. Um, um,
Audience likes it.
I think I think this is subtle, but the difference between the battleground map or maps and national polls and voting turnout polls, etc., is going to matter less this cycle, and that's for a couple reasons. One, there's clearly a trend and this is kind of goes back to my answer about 2022. We are doing a bit better in battleground states than in national polling, than you've seen Democrats do in previous presidential cycles. So I think we should anticipate now that there's been this assumption, well, Democrat has to be ahead by 3 to 4.5 points in the national polling to make up for their electoral college advantage, to win 270. But the polls, the difference between the national and battleground polls are tightening. We're, of course, like to be doing better in both polls right now. But in good times and bad, really we saw a little shift in 20, but it's continued in 22 and is most relevant to presidential year. You're seeing that difference shrink. So I do think, Biden, Democratic, top of the ticket is going to have to overperform, is going to have to be ahead on the national polling. But this assumption that it has to be 3-4 points or we're doomed in the electoral college, that's not going to be the case this year. The other is related to the 2022 point I made earlier, which is we have to run a national campaign if we want to win the House, because the so many of the opportunity seats or our protect seats are in blue, primarily blue, to lesser extent red states. What I mean by that is, of course, California and New York, the turnout among our voters just falling through the floor, dropping off tremendously in the last midterm. If that happens again, if we rev it up in the battleground states, but our voters just aren't energized nationally in those districts we have to win for the House, we might win the White House, but it will be a very lonely victory for the House and Senate.
And not to belabor that point, Greg, but I've had the long held belief ever since Dobbs that perhaps abortion wasn't going to be the most important issue. I think it's always the economy, right? But even in 22, women weren't exactly living it yet, right? These state laws that have been enacted weren't necessarily cemented, but they are now, or they're beginning to be. I think 1 in 3 states basically you can't have an abortion. Texas, where we have experience, both you and I working in, is a prime example. Do you think it's going to have a lot more salience, I guess, amongst women voters come November versus just 2 years ago?
Yes. And I think it will be the most important issue, coupled with democracy, if we do our jobs right. And Democrats tend to look at these things wrong. And this is where we have a lot to learn from Republicans. They don't take a poll and see something that says, okay, socialism and guns are the top concerns of voters. That literally is never the case. And if it is, we're doomed. But it isn't. They go and make the election about that. They move the voters to where they need the election to be. And you may never see voters saying, the most important issue to me is what the Republicans are on the air with, et cetera. But they've defined the race. And they understand that a poll question about what's the most important issue and the things that define elections and that, build, echo chambers, that what works for their folks who they need to mobilize, that spills out into the community and becomes, if never the quote unquote, the issue of the election, is how they define it on our terms. Abortion, coupled with the threat to democracy, coupled to what the people who want to take away your abortion rights want to do with your Social Security and Medicare and healthcare, you name it. But linking those things will be the most important. And what is so salient and what abortion, I hate to talk about Dobbs isn't so crassly as an opportunity, but what it has done is given us an organizing imperative for, yes, this election, but let me tell, if I hear any quote unquote Democratic strategists or donors saying, oh, abortion was last election, they will show me they do not understand how campaigns work in the 21st century. This is not going away. This is a generational struggle. This will be a subtext every time a voter votes in 2024, 6, 8, 30, 32. And if you don't understand that, then you might want to find another occupation or hobby, as this is for too many, because this is not going away. This is going to be very, very potent politically. And if Democrats can get their acts together and the rest of us can support and drive this message home, this will define 2024. And it is going to define 2026, whether we're successful this year or not. And I believe we will be. But this will be front and center in 26. This is going nowhere. This is a generational fight we're
in. Yeah, I think you could also make the argument that Republicans have figured out how to drive the media narrative just as well. I mean,
yeah.
They have, I don't know, I can't put my finger on it exactly, but it seems like you can almost predict what bait the media is going to take on any given day just by watching,
well, they understand
right-wing pundit.
We tend to I never want to apologize for the media that I'm absolutely furious with, but so our side enables this by treating everything as a tactical, problem or a messaging challenge, instead of understanding that this is something much deeper, that we need to understand that what we need to build our coalition, invest in what is working and growing. And that, unfortunately, I could say for better or worse, but it could be for better. Politics is tribal. Our side is growing. They are taking away rights near and dear to our people and theirs, by the way. And this is not about a candidate little fix here or that, going to the New York Times with, some, little pulling some thread. They don't do that. I mean, they do now and then, but they fall in line. And, not just because that's what they do, but because that's the right strategy. It's how you win. We're getting better despite how it feels now, Albert. But we gotta raise our game and not expect the New York Times to figure it out. They're not coming to save us along with the courts or anyone else. It's us and the voters, man.
Yeah, you just gave me a time relapse here a little bit. I remember when Bush got reelected, in 2004. Back then we would talk to our opposition, and my counterpart at the RNC, who was doing the Latino engagement, took me out for drinks and said, "Listen, man, don't be so hard on yourself. The reason it's easy for us to do what we do is that we have three fish that we need to keep swimming together: the NRA, the Christian Coalition, and the Chamber of Commerce." I would add a couple of more right-wing groups these days. But he said, but you guys, you got the tree huggers, you got Hispanics, you got blacks. He went down the list like he ran out of fingers.
Yeah.
And it's like, so I tip my hat to you guys for just winning anything. So, in my misery, that made me feel.
No, I appreciate that. Better. And it's true. It's a lot. It's a lot. Doing this work is harder.
It is harder.
It is. Well said.
Greg, you've been very generous with your time today. I really appreciate, our audience appreciates you. We know it's a very busy time of the cycle for anyone to be doing a podcast, especially someone with your responsibilities that you have. But we pull one question out of the mailbag each week. And this one comes to us from a gentleman by the name of Peter Carey. He lives in Arlington, Virginia, and he would like to know what it was like growing up in Connecticut.
Well, you can tell that nutmegger Carrie that I have no comment. I wasn't ready for this. Come on.
What's the
Drives me
story
crazy.
behind Connecticut? It
'Cause-
drives you crazy.
Because he's like,
Well,
where
where
are
did
you
it start?
from? You know, because I reminded him once, I'm actually, despite you said I was a son of the Midwest, I was actually born outside of Boston. So I have like New England sports allegiances that like annoy him, like the Red Sox, not the Patriots, by the way. I actually hate the Patriots. So he was like, so where are you from? And then I'd happen to say, like, I mean, I hate the state of Connecticut. It's like my least favorite state in the country. I won't explain why. So he just like something, Peter gets his head around something and like never lets it go. So he's like, he happened to say, where are you, wherever the hell you're from, Connecticut. He's like, oh yeah, Connecticut. Because it clicked for him that I hate Connecticut. And now he just never lets it go. Never lets it go.
This has been the Target Smart podcast
Jesus.
with your host, Albert Morales, and our guest, Greg Speed, president of America Votes, one of the finest. It's an institution now. It's no longer an organization. It's an institution that's cemented into the Democratic Party, progressive space, and without them,
Yeah.
I can assure you we would not be where we are today.
Thank you,
And we
Albert.
wanna
So
thank
it's now
Greg for
official.
his time.
I can go tell everyone we're an institution.
Yes, you're an institution.
I love it.
been-
Thank you.
That's a fact. That's a fact. I think your last conference, you probably, if I don't know why they didn't call a fire marshal on the convention center because that thing
tried,
was at.
actually.
There were more people there than at the some galas that I'd been at.
Yeah.
So, in any event, folks, don't forget to listen to us on anywhere you get your podcast, whether it's Spotify, Apple, you name it, Pandora, and subscribe to us on YouTube. Give us a like, share with your family and friends. We're going to continue to have great, maybe not as good guests as his caliber, but we're going to do our best. We thank Greg for joining us this weekend. The good folks at America Votes, all the good work that they do.
Great.
Let's win
Thank
in
you,
November,
Albert.
Greg.
Great.
We'll see you soon.
Great seeing
I
you.
hope to see you before Christmas.
Yeah, you know it. Over Peters.
All right. Talk to you. Bye.
Great seeing you, buddy.